Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our harps. For there our captors asked us for songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How could we sing God's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O God, against the residents of Edom, the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they said, tear it down, down to its foundations. O daughter Babylon, you devastator. A blessing on anyone who pays you back what you have done to us. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. I haven't been singing much, at all, over the last few weeks. I just haven't been feeling it. Many of you are aware that I'm currently in active chemotherapy treatment for multiple myeloma. And in the midst of that, the music that used to energize or comfort me hasn't been doing the trick. It seems no match for the negative news around me. And frankly, negative is what the news is these days, isn't it? Especially viewed through the lens of social media that monetizes outrage and anger and negativity. Frankly, the world is a mess, no matter where you look. We might cast our gaze to places that feel far away, like Ukraine, where the Russian invasion and response continues to take an unmeasurable toll. We can observe the protests in Iran after the woman was killed by their morality police for not wearing her hijab correctly. We hear terrible stories of the sex trafficking and violence in Venezuela. And closer to home, the news is full of information about a healthcare system in crisis with staff shortages and surgical delays and ER closures, from monkeypox to the avian flu to COVID resurgences. Illness is everywhere. While I'm dealing with cancer, many of you are also dealing with not insignificant health concerns. And then there is the climate emergency, as the Secretary General of the UN described it as at their General Assembly in September. He argued that the world is in peril in the face of multiplying conflicts and geopolitical tensions and climate changes that are having consequences like increased frequency of very severe weather events, like hurricanes Fiona and Ian, for example. I could go on and on and on, and no doubt so could you. Or I could just ignore all that. Turn it off, pretend it doesn't exist. It is, after all, Thanksgiving Sunday, which is supposed to be a feel-good sort of day. So, never mind about all the bad stuff. Let's eat some turkey. Happy Thanksgiving! Only it's not so easy as all that, is it? We can pretend not to know about all the things around the world until, of course, it's one of our family members who is living in Port aux Basques, Newfoundland, as the hurricane sweeps through. Until it's our loved one who has died or is waiting and waiting and waiting for surgery. until we're the one who dreads going to that stressful job, or is dealing with a debilitating addiction, or who is struggling with that complicated family situation that appears to have no resolution. Right now, just ignoring it or pretending I don't have cancer isn't really an option for me, as much as that does sound appealing. So then what? How do you have your happy Thanksgiving? Then what? Then Psalm 137. It's not something we read in church very often. It doesn't appear in the regular cycle of readings, I think because it doesn't pretend. It begins by saying, people want us to sing, but there's no music left in us. And it continues as this emotional, even angry lament. If it were on television, it would be preceded by one of those disclaimers. Contains scenes of violence. Some images may be distressing to some listeners. Discretion strongly advised. It's a 2,500-year-old Hebrew poem set in what was called the Babylonian Exile. So written from the perspective of Judeans who were captives in Babylon after this war that defeated the kingdom of Israel and destroyed Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. And for Hebrew people, it was this defining moment of defeat. Some biblical scholars argue that 70% of the Old Testament is tackling the question of how the catastrophe of the exile was possible and what Israel could maybe learn from it. Now, even though we don't hear it in church very often, some of the words of this psalm ring familiar to us. It's a psalm that talks about music and the struggle of singing in this foreign land, so it's been picked up by musicians and composers through time. Bach, Dvorak, Verdi, all created classical musical settings. Don McLean recorded the Israeli melody version, the one that's actually in our hymn book and was also used on the television show Mad Men. By the waters of Babylon. And it appears in Godspell as on the willows there we hung up our lives, for our captors there required. And Boney M had that disco hit. You remember? By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, there we wept when we remembered Zion. So you've heard it, I think. And regardless of the rhythm or the tune, the psalm describes the way that they were taunted by their conquerors and told to sing the songs of their homeland. But how, they asked, could they sing in this strange foreign land, so far away from any feeling of home, so stuck in a situation that felt so wrong? In the face of catastrophe, when all they can imagine to do is weep, why would they sing? You know, I'm struck that those original rivers of Babylon are today in war-torn regions of Iraq and Syria, where those themes may well ring with renewed authenticity. Indeed, these themes that appear in this psalm have repeated themselves again and again through history. Back in 1852, Frederick Douglass quoted this psalm and argued that African Americans being expected to celebrate American independence was akin to Judean captives being mockingly coerced to perform songs in praise of Jerusalem. It was reenacted in Nazi death camps during the Second World War, when Jews were forced to sing and dance their music and their songs while soldiers mocked and laughed. It was part of the humiliation, intending to rob Jewish people of their identity and their dignity and their hope. It was also a pattern that appeared throughout processes of colonization, and is exactly why Canada Day is met with such ambivalence by many Indigenous peoples and those who struggle to find paths of reconciliation. And today, any who find themselves suffering or accompanying those who are suffering might well wonder how to sing a song of the goodness of God. We might instead resonate with the honest emotion that appears in this psalm, even the unpleasant outburst of fury expressing a fantasy desire for revenge that ends the text. Indeed, that part is often censored out for good reason. Discretion is advised. While the symbolism of cutting off the power to the Babylonian Empire by cutting out the youngest generation might be logically explained to us, it is offensive to our ears to hear people wishing for the deaths of children, even our enemies' children. It is not okay. But these people had watched their own babies die. And this desire for restoration and retribution is kind of part of the human condition. The range of emotion that comes with disappointment and oppression and deep pain. And if we do not identify with those emotions, perhaps we have never lost that much or been abused that much or hoped that much. What I think is helpful to remember is that these Psalms are prayers to God, not instructions to people. They're not the end, but a beginning of a conversation. And given that, I wonder if the Psalms are a bit smarter than we are. We who push down our feelings or try to shut them off or pretend they don't exist. What if, instead, like our ancestors in the faith, we invited God into our feelings, whatever they are? I wonder if by voicing these emotions, we can catch a glimpse of what we are capable of, and sometimes what we're doing, or even turning a blind eye to, or perpetuating in our lives, even as we pretend we're not. Hebrew biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann argues that genuine forgiveness and restoration is only possible after a genuine articulation of the truth. Isn't that why every process of reconciliation is connected to naming truth? So Brueggemann says, it is an act of profound faith to entrust one's most precious hatreds to God, knowing they will be taken seriously. And what do you imagine God would help us do with those feelings? What would it mean for them to be taken seriously? What kind of perspective might we find if we acknowledged what was going on inside? How might God help us sing our songs, even when we find ourselves stuck or captive, far from anything that feels like comfortable or home? For that's what this psalm is really asking for, a pathway through pain. A way to sing songs when singing is the last thing you feel like doing. A way to claim hope in the midst of what appears to be hopelessness. A way to remember what matters to you when remembering just feels like grief? I don't know if that's what you are asking for these days, if that's what you need this Thanksgiving, but it might be. And if it is, what this psalm reminds us is that others have been where you are. And I think it reminds all of us to be cautious in our habit to ask people to join our celebrations on our terms. Here, everyone stand up and say what you're thankful for today. Somehow we expect everyone to clap when we sing if you're happy and you know it. But you can't feel grateful on demand from someone else. If someone is asking you to make a show of happiness to make themselves feel better, you don't have to do that. And if we're the ones asking for that kind of demonstration, we might want to rethink our approach and see if instead we could start a conversation like the one that is started in Psalm 137. One that remembers, one that doesn't pretend, one that invites us to sing our sad songs. But that is actually the beginning of hope. I realized a few weeks ago, for example, that I was struggling to find things to be grateful for. I was feeling the pressure of putting on the brave face, whatever that means, and finding the silver linings in a situation that was really one piece of bad news after another. You know what's funny though? When I stopped trying to think of special or big things to be thankful for, stopped trying to be upbeat on demand, I started to see some really very ordinary things that made me feel quite grateful. Like warm socks, or a hot shower, or the sunshine when you feel cold all over. A really, really good relationship with my family doctor. Or it turns out this coleslaw that my sister makes, which somehow makes some food palatable. The kindness of someone who cares enough to send a card. And once I started thinking about those kinds of things, well, the list got pretty long, pretty fast. Like, how great is electricity? And how resilient is God's creation? And is that music I hear coming from somewhere? Is it deep within or on the wind or, I don't know, both? It seems to me that somehow being thankful for those things means more in the face of disappointment than it does if I'm trying to turn off reality to look for something positive. It seems to me that this is the thing about hope. It's really only valuable to those who feel sort of hopeless, who want to but are not being forced to sing in a foreign land. But if we sit with it and let go of our need to pretend, we might make room for some other things to emerge. I am confident that we will start to hear God's song bubbling up through the cracks, lifting us on the melody of it. For it turns out it's been playing all along. And when we're ready, we will sing along. Thanks be to God. Amen.